Hey and howdy everyone, it's Jeannie with Paper Pixie Ink. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be moving on to tutorial number 3, which covers the back of the second page, the third page, and the fourth page. So remember, we're only working on the base components for the design of these pages. We will decorate once we're done all of the base components. So let's get started. So this side is just a pocket, so I kept this one plain. So if you recall, our first pocket was this fancier edge one. You can do all of your pockets just like this. If you don't have a punch, or you don't have a punch that you want to use, you can just use some scrap pieces of your cardstock and do some very basic pockets. So I'm just going to grab this strip. So this is roughly 2.5 by 8.5. So I'm going to cut it down lengthwise this way to 7 1/4 because our pages are 6 1/4 wide, and we want to make sure that we have a flap on either side. So I make my flaps at 1/2 inch, so that's 1 inch for both the left and right side. So 6 1/4 page size means 7 1/4 inches that we need for a pocket. And I'm just going to leave this at 2.5 inches. So I'm going to grab my scoreboard. And I'm going to score 3 sides. So I'm going to score this on the long side. I'm going to score at 6 3/4 inches. Flip it around. And I'm going to do it at 2 inches. I'm going to flip it around again. And I'm going to do it at 6 3/4 inches again. Which means that the space between this score line and this score line should be 6 1/4 inches. Just like that. And then to create the pocket, we are going to take our snips and we are going to cut off these corners. And I always cut off those corners so I get a nice flat corner when I lay my pocket down. Because otherwise you'll have doubled up cardstock sitting on top of each other and it won't lay as flat. So I'm not going to attach this to the page yet, but I'm going to put it with what we have already created. So if you recall, we created our pocket for our inside front cover, and then we created this component for the front of the first page. And then we created this component for the back of the first page. And then we put a flap on the front of the second page, and we've created our pocket for the back of the second page. So moving on to the front of the third page. So this is the front of the third page, and it's just one of these very basic flip elements that you have seen or may have seen in some of my other videos. So I am going to go ahead and create that. And again, this one just has a very basic pocket in the back of it, using the component that we create as the pocket. So to get started, we are going to cut some cardstock. So this component is 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. I grab my cutter and another piece of paper, and I am going to cut this to 4 3/4 along the long side. And then because it's just 4 3/4, 4 3/4 times 2 is 9.5. So I'm going to cut this to 9.5 so that we can score it 4 3/4 and create the square fold. Grabbing my scoreboard. I'm going to score 4 3/4, which is the halfway between the 9.5. So 4 3/4. Then I'm going to fold. And this creates my So this is the base of our component. We are also going to need, so for this component, we also have the kind of flap component that we create here that will lift these two cards up and out. So to create these two components, we are going to need 2 pieces of cardstock that are cut to 5 3/4, so an inch longer than what your square component is. So ours is 4 3/4. So we're going to cut this piece to 5 3/4 by 1.5 inches. And we're going to need 2 of those because you need one for either side. So this one, this was the last little bit of paper that was left from our last cuts. And then I'm going to take this piece of scrap that I had and I'm going to cut it to 5 3/4. By 1.5. Is this one still 1.5? A little bit better. So we will go ahead and just use these 2 pieces actually. So we ended up not needing this one. Put this way. I'm going to grab my scoreboard, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to score both of these lengthwise at the 1 inch mark. So just 1 inch straight down. 1 inch and straight down. And we're just doing that with both. I'm going to grab my cutting mat and these 2 pieces, a pencil and my ruler. And the first thing that I'm going to do is on my score line, I'm going to measure 1 inch down. So 1 inch, and I'm just going to put a very light mark on that, and then on the side that is 1 inch, I'm going to mark 2 inches down. And then I am going to take my ruler and my scoring tool, and I am going to score from this 1 inch mark here on my already scored line to the 2 inch mark on this side. I am just going to score those. So I have a score line here, and then on this side, from this point here, I'm going to line my ruler up with the 1 inch mark here and my corner, and then I'm going to score all the way down. And then I'm going to take my paper snips and I'm going to cut out this section right here. We're just going to cut that right out. So for the right side, we are going to fold this over. So it's like this. And then we're going to open this up and we're going to fold this down. And I like lining it up on my board just to make sure that everything is fairly straight. And then this will flip down just like this. And then we are going to do that exact same thing for this side. And those are the components that will go inside here. These will just line up just like this. So I'm going to take glue and put it on this side of my flap when this is sitting like this. And then I'm going to use the edge of this and the corner here to line this piece up just like this and press it down. You want to make sure that it is very, very well pressed down because this component takes a lot of wear. So for this side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to flip it over, put glue on this side when it's sitting like this, glue on this side, and then I'm going to line this up in the corners as best as I can, and this lines up with the side. And then I'm going to press this down. And then burnish, burnish, burnish. And then I'm going to open these two up. So the flaps go like this. Remember, these go down like this and these go like this. And I'm just going to put glue on these little corner triangles. I'm going to do that for both sides. Hold them down and then flip this page down on top of them. And then burnish. And I would recommend letting this sit for a minute before you try to open it, just to make sure that it is super, super well stuck. Okay, so now that you have these two components glued in, we are going to create two little cards to go on this. The rule of thumb for this size, you can make this any size you want, really. You just kind of have to adjust a couple pieces. So obviously if you want to make, you know, the base size bigger, you need to adjust these. These will always be the length from here to here, plus an inch for this component. You will never have to change this unless you're making it like really, really massive maybe, at which point you're probably going to want to make sure that you're using like very, very thick cardstock, and there's, you know, other things to consider. The other piece will be your card size. So I always make mine just a little bit smaller than this mark here. So in this particular case, it's about 3 3/4 inches. So I'm going to make it probably about 3.5 inches. So it'll be 3.5 inches this way, and it'll be the same for both sides. So 3.5 inches this way. And then you can't make it any bigger than the size between this fold and this fold. So in this particular case, I'm going to make them 3.5 by 2.5, I think. So, and you're going to need 2 of those, one for either side. So I'm just going to grab my cutting board. And I'm just going to use a piece of my scrap cardstock from cutting other pages and whatnot. So I'm going to cut this to 2.5 and 2.5 and 3.5 and 3.5. So on the component, we are going to glue these onto this side, and we're just going to glue them right here. So I'm going to glue them just at the kind of bottom line here and just a smidgen off from the fold here, because you don't want this to interfere with it folding back in. So I'm just going to grab my glue. And I am going to put the glue on this tab. So I like to kind of just hold this here so I know roughly where to start my glue. And I'm going to go almost to the edge. And then all other sides. And then I'm just going to place it down. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. There you have it. So that is the base component, and then we are going to just put a little flap on here with a magnet so that we can make sure that this stays closed. So I'm just going to grab a scrap piece that I had. I'm going to cut it down a little bit because this is 4 3/4. We don't really need this to be that big. So I'm going to cut that down to 3 3/4. And I am going to score this. Roughly right along here. Fold on the score line. And this is going to go on here just like this. So this is what's going to be attached to your base, and this is the flap that opens. So we're going to flip this around. We're going to find the center on here. So remember, this is 4 3/4. So be 2 3/8 roughly. I just want the approximate center on that. And then this is going to go on just like this. So I want to find the center on here. So this is about 1.25 inches. So we're going to do 5/8. And then on the side that has the pencil mark, that's what's going to be showing here. So we're going to flip that over and we're going to put glue on this side of the little kind of square section here. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to use my middle mark here and my middle mark here to kind of line these up. And I'm going to set it so that my score mark is just a little off from the edge here, so that when it folds over, there is enough space for it to move with the thickness of the component. Because don't forget, you're going to end up putting pattern paper on this as well. So the last thing I'm going to do is put a couple of magnets on this. And I like using the Tim Holtz ones because nothing sticks to them, and if you do get something stuck to it, it comes right off. Whereas some of the other scissors, it's a little bit more difficult to get the, adhesive unstuck from it. There we have it. So that is the component for the front of our third page. So the front of our third page. This will go on just like this, kind of centered, and we will glue here, along here, and along here, leaving the back of it open for a tag or insert of some sort. So moving on, the back of the third page is fairly simplistic in that it's just this little component. And again, it sits lower on the page with this back of the component being open to have a tuck spot for a tag or whatever. So we're going to go ahead and create this rectangular component that you see here. Okay, so we are going to start by cutting 2 pieces of cardstock to 11 inches. So 11 inches is the length of our paper by 4 inches. And we need 2 of these, and it's 8.5 wide, so we need to cut another 1/2 inch off here. So now we have 2 pieces that are 11 inches by 4 inches. And I'm going to grab my scoreboard, one of my pieces, and I am going to score at even intervals. So 1/2 of 11 is 5.5, and then 1/2 of 5.5 is 2 3/4. And then between the 5.5 and the 11 mark, you can either do it at 8 1/4, or you could flip it around this way and do it at 2 3/4 again. And we need to do that for both pieces. So 2 3/4, 5.5, and 8 1/4, or again, you could flip it around and do it at 2 3/4 again, whichever works best for you. So for these 2 pieces, we are going to take a ruler, and these are 4 inches across, so For this score line and this score line, we are going to mark them 2 inches up. Just a light little mark there on both sides. And we are going to cut those. So we're going to do that for both pieces. So let's go ahead and mark these ones as well. So you can cut them with your paper snips. I'm not exactly that great with those, so I am just going to line this up on my cutting board. You can see that. So I'm going to line this up on my cut line, and I am just going to cut up to that mark. And I'm going to do that for all 4 of my cuts. And again, you can use your paper snips. I'm just really bad at cutting a straight line, unless it's a really small cut. Okay, so now you have these 2 pieces that look like this with cuts along these. So what we're going to do is I'm going to fold along my score lines. It doesn't necessarily matter quite yet how you fold them, but I'm going to fold this way. Dog hair everywhere. And this way. So I have these 2 pieces just like this. I'll flip one over, and that's backwards because I never get it right. Okay, so now you have 2 pieces that are like this. So cuts on one side, cuts on the top. So they're kind of opposite. So you are going to put this piece over this piece. So you have the cuts here and the cuts up top. You're going to place this over and connect the 2. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this side. So now we have these 2 components that sit together just like this. And then to keep them together and kind of solidify it, we're going to cut 2 pieces, for one for each side of these, that will be glued on top so that they will stay nice and solid. So to do that, we are going to need to cut 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 4. So if you have scrap, go ahead and use that. I have a couple pieces, so I am going to cut this to 5.5 by 4. Hold on to these because you never know when you might need them. And then 5.5 by 4. And we're just going to glue these right on top of these, being very careful not to get glue in these spots here. So I'm going to make sure this is nice and even. And And then I'm going to put glue down. And again, you want to try and get these as close as possible without going into those lines. So I'm going to lay this down, and then I'm just going to do this to try and make sure that the whole thing is as lined up as possible before I press it down firmly. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And then we are going to flip it over and do the exact same thing on this side. Make sure it's as lined up as possible. Press it down, and then glue the other side. And there we have it. So when you open, you can open from either side. And the other one, I just stuck a piece of my chiffon ribbon around it to hold it closed, and we'll do the same thing with this one. However, if you wanted to, you could use a series of magnets on the inside to help hold it closed as well. You could also use some kind of like twist flap or something like that. I like my ribbon for this one. It works quite well. So we now have the back of page 3 done. So again, we won't put this on until we're ready to do our pattern paper, because we'll need pattern paper on the back here before we can lay this down. So the front of page 4 is just a simple pocket, so let's go ahead and do that. I just used another scrap piece of cardstock that I had to create my pockets, so let's grab another piece and create this. Again, it's going to be a piece that is 7 1/4, so that you have a 1/2 inch tabs on either side to create your pocket. And then however wide this is, you need to make sure that it's wide enough to create a pocket and have a 1 inch tab, so that you have 1 inch tabs all around. So I'm just grabbing this piece of scrap that I had. So it's 11 inches by approximately 3 inches. So that will be fine to create a pocket. So I'm going to cut this to 7 1/4. Save that. And then I am going to score this using my scoreboard. So I'm going to do 6 1/4. I'm going to flip it around, 2 1/2, flip it around, 6 1/4. I don't like scoring this close to the edge. Being right-handed, I always seem to mess it up. So I just flip my pages around. So now that we have our pocket, I'm just going to use some snips and cut off my corners like I always do. And then I'm just going to fold and burnish my tabs down. so that when I go to glue it down on my page, it will be nice and flat. So there is our pocket. So that will be the front of the fourth page, just like this. So on the back of the fourth page, we have another pocket. This is another decorative pocket with that same punch. So let's go ahead and create another one of those. So I'm just going to grab this, and this should be good. So this scrap piece that I have here is about 4 3/8 or so. I'm going to trim it up just slightly to 4 1/4, just so it's a more even measurement for you all. And then I am going to cut this to 7 1/4 because our pages are 6 1/4 and you need a 1/2 inch tab on all sides. And then I'm going to grab another scrap piece of paper. And this is just going to be a second cut of the punch to lay on the back to kind of make it a little thicker and sturdier for use. So I'm just going to cut this to about 6 1/4. And we'll punch that as well. So again, this is the punch that I used. This is an EK Success punch. I can't remember the exact name of it. I've had it for like ever. There are lots of different punches you can use. You can leave it plain. You could use dies. There's lots of edge dies that you could use. You could cut it with fancy scissors. There's lots and lots of options. I like punches just because they have relatively high ease of use. So center to the best of your abilities and punch. Line everything up. Punch. And other side. Line everything up. And punch. For this one, I'm going to score it real quick. So at 6 3/4, turn 3 3/4, turn 6 3/4. And then on the side that doesn't have a score, on the long side, we're going to do our best to center this. And punch. And line up as best you can. Punch. And then other side, line up as best you can. And punch. So we're going to set this to the side because we're done with it for now. Rid of all our little pieces. So now we're just going to take our snips and we are going to cut off these sides at the score lines. And then we're going to cut this angle just so that it doesn't interfere. And then, as always, we're going to cut off these corners. So this is going to go on the inside of this, just to give it a little bit more durability. So it makes it just a little bit thicker. If you're using a really thick cardstock, like 110 pounds or 120 pounds to create your base album, you most likely won't need to do this. I just like doing it when I use a thinner one, just so that I can make sure that it is more durable, so that as you're, you know, putting things in and out of the pockets, that this will stay together. So I'm going to go ahead and put glue on here, and I'm just going to put it around the edges kind of as quickly as I can, so that my glue doesn't really start to set and dry before I have a chance to actually glue the two pieces together. And then I'm going to make sure that I get around this bottom piece here, just because I do want to make sure that this stays together as good as well as possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put glue on the whole thing, but as much as possible. So, and then I'm just going to lightly cover the bottom piece with liquid glue as well. Then I'm just going to turn it over and glue it down. Doing my best to line up everything as much as possible. So there we have it. So that just gives extra durability to your pocket. And then I'm just going to use my bone folder, get a nice crisp fold in my tabs for my pocket. And there we have the pocket for the other side of the page. So that's the end of tutorial number 3. Next time we will move on to number 4, which should cover hopefully the 5th and 6th page, and potentially the back of the inside of the back cover. For the very complicated component, we'll be cutting all the pieces for it and doing a couple of scores, but we won't actually be compiling that component until we're actually ready to decorate the page. So we will be moving on to that hopefully soon. So stay tuned, and as always, if you're interested in seeing more, don't forget to click on that subscribe button.